Welcome to Understanding Islam, the Big Picture. This week we come to episode 10, in which we're going to look at the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century. The peninsula at this time really is caught in between two great world empires. To the north, there's the Byzantine Empire, the old Roman Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire as we call it. Now, in the 3rd century, the 4th century, this Roman Empire began to shrink back from the west, and in the 5th century it moved its capital over to Byzantium, the city of Constantinople, or modern-day Istanbul. And at this time, it has a geographical spread that really goes around the Mediterranean, along the western edges of Spain, along the coast of North Africa, through Egypt, Syria, and then around through Turkey and Greece and part of Italy. The Roman Empire at this time is referred to in the Qur'an. Chapter 30 of the Qur'an is called al-Rum, the Romans, and it's this Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. Now, their administrative capital in the Arab lands was at Damascus in Syria. They were Greek-speaking, of course, and they tended to look down on their non-Greek citizens. And so the word barbarian actually means those people who don't speak Greek. Now, in terms of religion, the people of the Byzantine Empire are Christians of the Orthodox Christian school, that is, following the common position both of Eastern and Western Orthodox Christianity at this time. The other great empire at this time is the Sasanian Empire. They are based in modern Persia, Iran, and in Iraq. They are Zoroastrians. Now, these two empires have been in a state of battle, standoff battle, skirmishes, for a period of decades. In fact, during the period 607 to 628, that strip of land from Egypt through Palestine up as far as Syria was under the control of the Sasanian Empire, and in 628 it was brought back under Byzantine control. Now, these facts become important because when we look at the context for chapter 9 of the Qur'an, this is the situation of the Byzantines taking control of that piece of land again, and it is when the Prophet is preparing for the Battle of Tabuk. Now, as you might imagine, along the peninsula's borders, as they border on to the Sasanian and the Byzantine empires, we have Arab tribes or clans that have become their satellites, their agents, and quite a few of these have also become Christians. When we come to look at the religious traditions around the Arabian Peninsula, then we see that we have Jews, especially in the northern part. After the fall of the state of Palestine in the year 70, then the Jewish tribes were dispersed over the next 40 years by the Romans, and quite a few of them passed down into the Arabian Peninsula. And they tended to settle at oases in the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. So in Medina itself, and in a place called Khaybar further to the north, and in several other peninsulas around, because it seems that also they were engaged in trade from one oasis to another, and also down into the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula into modern-day Yemen. The situation of Christianity at this time is much more complex. The first few centuries of Christianity often see divisions between different Christian groups regarding the position of Jesus. The majority position, which is that taken by Eastern and Western Orthodox churches or mainstream churches, is that Jesus is both wholly divine and also wholly human, that he has a human and a divine nature. This was a question of dispute between various other Christian groups. So that's the position of the Byzantines to the north of the Arabian Peninsula. Across in the east, in modern-day Iraq, we have a different school of Christianity, which we call the Nestorians. They're often called the Great Church of the East because they go from Iraq along the Great Silk Road all the way as far as China, and then they also have sent missionaries down to the southeast as far as India. Now, the Nestorian position was to say that they stressed the humanity of Jesus. The divine Logos rested in the person, the human person of Jesus, but this did not make him divine. Now, we can see that the step from the Nestorian position to Islam is a shorter step, because they do not hold to the divinity of Jesus. They also do not have a doctrine of original sin. Over to the western side of the Arabian Peninsula, we have another Christian school, and this one was stressing the divinity of Jesus over against his humanity. We normally refer to this as the Monophysite school, and it's to be found in Egypt and also in Ethiopia. Indeed, the Coptic Church of Egypt today and the Church of Ethiopia would still follow that sort of doctrine of the person of Jesus. Now, if you go further to the west, then there was a position that was even stronger than that. This we call the Docetist tradition. And they really held that the humanity of Jesus was really just illusory. Indeed, some of them held that Jesus was not really crucified at all, but was taken up by God, and someone else was substituted in his place. Further to the west again, along the coast of North Africa, we have another Christian school. These are the Arians, and their doctrine of Jesus was really that he was a kind of super prophet. He was not divine, he was a creature of God, a super prophet, we can say. Now, this tradition was there throughout North Africa and up into Spain. Therefore, again, we can see that the step from the Arian position, which is essentially Unitarian, to Islam is a shorter step, and therefore we see a much more rapid conversion to Islam in these areas. In the Arabian Peninsula itself, down around modern-day Yemen, there were Christian settlements in places called Najran and also in Sana'a. We're not too clear what kind of Christians they were, except that we know that they're not Byzantines. Probably they were Monophysites, having received their Christianity from their near neighbor across the mouth of the Red Sea in Abyssinia or Ethiopia. When we come to look at the people of the Arabian Peninsula at this time, they are essentially divided into tribes and then subgroups that are often called clans. These are people of oral history. Things are not normally written down. People have to remember their history, who they are and where they come from. What are their relationships with other people? This made them very interested in genealogy. who are you and where do you come from? And so people would memorize their genealogies and people would specialize in this particular branch of knowledge. Now, the basis of the tribal or clan system was that was your principal identity. As long as you were a member of your clan or tribe, they would protect you. They would revenge you if anybody was to attack you. And they would defend your honor, and you would defend the honor of other members. So we see essentially a tribal structure, and anybody who does not defend their honor, anybody who does not seek revenge for an attack against them, it is as though you have lost your prestige in the face of other people. The way that many of these tribes used to interrelate with one another was a mixture between, on the one hand, federations making pacts between different tribes, and on the other hand, raiding one another. Raiding was a pastime that people engaged in as a matter of course. One would raid another tribe and try to take their animals, their slaves, and their womenfolk. There was such a strong emphasis on raiding that certain months of the year were declared to be truce months in which no raiding would take place. This would give people a chance to rebuild their lives, to engage in trade, and to go and make pilgrimage to visit one of the shrines of the Arabian Peninsula. When federations took place, they tended to be, again, based on tribal identity. And we encounter here the important vehicle of a consultation or shura. A shura was a way of gathering together, the meeting of the elders, seeking common consent and agreement. And this becomes an important part of the way that the tribes conducted themselves. These different tribes would speak various different dialects of Arabic. It would be quite hard for non-members of the tribe to understand that dialect. And yet it seems that they also had the ability, especially when writing poetry or reciting poetry, to do so in such a way that it could be understood on a supra-tribal basis. That is, a wider group of people could understand it. This was one of the functions of gathering places, like market towns, like places of pilgrimage. In these places, people would gather and they would hear and exchange the latest poetry. We can divide the Arab tribes up into three ways of life. There were nomads, semi-nomads, and settled people. The nomads tended to be people who were on the move all the time, and therefore they would make their living by breeding camels who could travel with them. The semi-nomads tended to live more on the fringes. They had a much more restricted area in which they traveled, and they would herd sheep and goats. By contrast, then, the settled people would be much more involved in agriculture. They would be having orchards of fruit, of date palms. They would be growing wheat and other forms of vegetables. Even when people moved into settlements, they would keep their tribal identity. So that would be the principal identity of each of the groups within the settlement, and they would sort things out between themselves on the basis of shura or consultation. One of the functions of this tribal strategy was that it was a way of giving patronage or protection to people. The tribal leaders would say, anybody who interferes with anybody from my tribe or clan will answer to me and to the whole clan. Now, this is important when we come to think of Prophet Muhammad and the early Muslim community, because he was protected by the clan chief of his own clan, who was Abu Talib. This protection could be extended to non-clan members if the clan leader chose to do that. And after the death of Abu Talib, this is precisely what Muhammad tried to do in getting clan leaders from other clans to give him their protection. If we look at the religion of the Arabs at this time, we have a system, first of all, of polytheism, that is, of many different gods, but also a system that we generally call henotheism, that is, a hierarchy of gods. So people would have their family gods, and these would be kept in their dwelling places and greeted as one came in and went out, either to take a blessing as one goes out about one's business, or to give thanks as one returns home. Then there would be clan gods. These would generally be named, and they would have a sanctuary, a place where people would go to offer them sacrifices and to pay their devotions there. In addition, we can see that there were supra-tribal gods, that is, gods who were worshipped by different tribes who would come together and give their devotion and respect to those supra-tribal deities. 3 of these are actually named in the Qur'an in chapter 53, as Lat, Uzza, and Manat. And each would have their particular shrine city. So Taif, for example, was the shrine city of Lat. Now it seems that there was also a concept in this pre-Islamic Arabian society of a supreme god, the god, as it were, who sits on the top of this pinnacle of many different gods. And this was sometimes called Allah. So we have a system of a hierarchy of gods: family, clan, superclan, tribal, supra-tribal, and then perhaps also a supreme deity sitting above all of them. Within this context, the Kaaba in Mecca becomes very important, because Mecca was a great city of pilgrimage, and the Kaaba stood in the middle as the focal point of this pilgrimage. Now, we're told that in the early years of the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad, there were something like 360 gods who were in, on, and around the Kaaba. And people would come from the interior to pay their respects to their gods, to offer their sacrifices or their worship, and while they were there, they would then stock up on goods that they needed for their next period of traveling in the desert. And so we can see that trade and pilgrimage go hand in hand during this period. If you think about the position of the Arabian Peninsula, then you can see that it sits between Africa to the west and India to the east, and then the Far East beyond that. Therefore, trade has always played an important part in the history of the Arabian Peninsula. From the coast of East Africa, you can see the way that shipping would go up in and out of different ports heading toward the Arabian Peninsula. They would be tending to bring ivory, rhino horns, precious jewels, stones of one sort or another, coconut oil, and they would then be heading for the Arabian Peninsula. Coming from the other side, from India and Indonesia and the Far East, we can see that they would be coming again by ship. They're bringing spices, pepper, jewels, cotton, gum resin, precious stones, all sorts of things coming by ship across toward the Arabian Peninsula, and then you meet a block. The block is because if you tried to take shipping up the Red Sea itself, there was a high chance that you would be becalmed and the pirates would come out and get you. And so what tended to happen was that these goods would be offloaded on the tip of the Arabian Peninsula, for example at the modern-day port of Aden, and there they would be sold on to merchants who would travel by camel trains, and there was then a camel train superhighway, we can say, that goes up from Yemen right the way through the Arabian Peninsula to Damascus and to the Mediterranean coast. Now, if you think about it, this is a long and dangerous journey. It's a journey that goes through pretty hostile terrain. It's a journey in which water becomes critical. And so this camel train superhighway goes from one oasis to another. It goes between mountains. And so you can see that a very clearly defined path has been built, has been worked out as the best route to travel. The merchants would tend to travel in groups so that they could protect one another. And indeed, you sometimes get reports of a camel caravan of 1,000 caravans who would be making one of these great trading journeys. Now, the journey is long. And so from Mecca, for example, the camel caravans would set out and they would travel in one season of the year down as far as Aden, and there they would buy goods that have come in by ship, and then they would take them back as far as Mecca. Then they would regroup, and another season would be taken to travel up that great spice route, as it was called, all the way up through the Arabian Peninsula, and then to branch off through the Syrian desert toward Damascus. Along the route, you touch into various towns and cities. So one goes through Najran, through Taif, through Mecca, and so on, all the way up to Damascus. And these cities then become great trading places where one is trading with people coming from the interior, where there's an exchange of goods between one merchant and another. So these become great centers of commerce. Now, the way in which this trade was conducted gives us another insight into something about Prophet Muhammad. It seems that the camel train merchants used to take goods on trust, and they would then transport them to the markets of Damascus, and they would sell them there for the best price that they could get, and then come back and bring the money to the original owners, and the merchants themselves would make their money through a sort of profit-sharing basis. They would have a share in the profit once they returned. Now you can see that such a system is wide open to forms of corruption and abuse. So not surprisingly, some of these merchants were not highly praised because of their lack of trustworthiness. It is in this context that Muhammad, as a young man learning the profession of being a traveling merchant, gets the nickname Al-Amin, the trustworthy one, the one who deals honestly and fairly with buyer and seller in all his dealings. Now, these cities that we can identify along the way have various characteristics about them. Mecca was the city of trade and of pilgrimage. Just to the southeast of Mecca, we have the city of Taif, which was a city of horticulture. It had a much more temperate climate, a higher rainfall, and so therefore you could grow fruit there, you could grow wheat, you could grow all the crops that were needed. Sometimes Taif is called the Garden of Mecca, because Mecca provided the natural trading outlet for its goods. The city of Yathrib, which was later to become Medina, was well known for its date plantations, and so many different sorts of dates were grown there. Join me next week as we look at what happened after the death of Muhammad from the Sunni perspective. And don't forget that you can download an article to go with this program from my own website, and you're very welcome to send in questions by email, which will be dealt with in our next question and answer session. I look forward to seeing you again.